January 29, 1943, South Pacific Ocean, just north of Rennell Island, nightfall. The sea is black glass. Not calm, never calm, but heavy, breathing, rolling in long, slow swells that seem to swallow sound itself. Above, the sky is a low ceiling of darkness, thick clouds smothering the stars. There is no moon, no horizon, just shadows layered upon shadows. Then, a distant hum. So faint at first it feels imagined, a trick of the wind, but it grows. Look, mechanical, relentless. On the bridge of the heady cruiser USS Chicago CA-29, officers turn their heads in unison. They've heard that sound before. Aircraft. Enemy aircraft. Sound bearings confirm. A voice cuts through the darkness, sharp, controlled, but already tightening. The crew doesn't panic, not yet, but something shifts. A ripple of tension spreads deck to deck, steel to steel, like current through a live wire. Because this isn't supposed to happen here. Not tonight. Hours earlier, Task Force 18 had been moving cautiously through these waters, an uneasy procession of American warships withdrawing from the long, brutal struggle for Guadalcanal. The campaign had dragged on for months, grinding men and machines into exhaustion. Victory was close now, almost within reach. But the Japanese weren't finished. Not even close. Back on Chicago's deck, a lookout squints into the void, straining his eyes against the darkness. Nothing. Then everything. A flash. Just a flicker, a ghost of light against the clouds. And suddenly, the night comes alive. Aircraft starboard side. The warning explodes across the ship, echoed and amplified through steel corridors and open decks. Klaxons wail. Boots pound. Men run. You can feel it now, the shift from waiting to surviving. Anti-aircraft crews scramble to their stations. Hands fumble for ammunition belts, metal clanking against metal. Fingers cold, slick with sweat, slam shells into place. Engines of unseen aircraft grow louder. Closer. Too close. The first Japanese torpedo bombers drop out of the darkness like predators diving from a cliff. Vet. Silent until they're not. Their engines scream as they skim just above the water, silhouettes barely visible, shapes against shapes, death wrapped in shadow. And then, light. Searchlights snap on, cutting through the night in harsh white beams. They rake across the ocean's surface, hunting. For a split second, one beam catches a plane. You see a clearly now green fuselage, red markings, a torpedo slung beneath its belly. It's already too late. Open fire. The order erupts and the ship answers. Guns roar to life. 40mm cannons hammer the darkness. 20mm guns chatter in rapid bursts, trace around stitching glowing lines across the sky. The recoil shakes the deck beneath your feet, a constant, violent rhythm. The air fills with noise, explosions, screams, metal tearing through wind. But the planes keep coming. They don't hesitate. They don't break. One bomber streaks straight toward Chicago's flank, impossibly low, its wings nearly kissing the waves. You can almost see the pilot's face, calm, focused, committed. He releases. A dark shape drops into the sea. A torpedo. It vanishes beneath the surface, leaving only a thin, white wake racing toward the ship. Hard to port. The helm spins. The cruiser begins to turn, but she's a massive beast of steel and momentum. She doesn't pivot. She leans, slowly. Too slowly. The first torpedo hits. A violent, gut-punch explosion rips into Chicago's bow. The deck lurches upward, then slams down. Steel screams. Lights flicker and die. Men are thrown off their feet, some into bulkheads, others into the black void of the sea. But there's no time to recover. Because a second wake is already slicing through the water. Impact. Another explosion, this one deeper, more devastating. The blast tears into the ship's side, flooding compartments instantly. Water surges in like a living thing, cold and unstoppable. Inside the hull, darkness swallows everything. Men scramble through rising water, groping for ladders, for light, for air. Some don't make it. Above deck, chaos. Smoke billows upward, thick and choking. Flames flicker in jagged bursts, illuminating faces twisted in shock and determination. The guns are still firing. They have to. Because the sky is still full of enemies. Another bomber dives. And another. The attack doesn't stop. It builds. Wave after wave, the Japanese press in, relentless, coordinated, deadly. Their torpedoes cut through the sea like knives, each one a silent promise of destruction. Chicago shudders under the assault. Wounded but not dead. Not yet. On the bridge, officers fight to maintain control. Damage reports flood in fragmented, desperate. Forward compartments flooding. Power loss in multiple sections. Casualties, heavy casualties. But through it all, one thing is clear. The ship is still afloat. And as long as she floats, she fights. You can feel the ship beneath you now, not just steel, but something alive, groaning, straining, refusing to give in. Men cling to that feeling. Because if the ship survives, they survive. Out in the darkness, the attackers begin to fade. Their engines retreat into the night, leaving behind only echoes and devastation. The guns fall silent, one by one, until all that remains is the crackle of fire, the hiss of escaping steam, and the distant slap of waves against a wounded hull. For a moment, there is stillness. Unreal, fragile. The kind of silence that only exists after violence. Then the reality settles in. Chicago is crippled. Her bow is torn open, compartments are flooding, power is failing. And worse, they are still deep in enemy-controlled waters. Night is far from over. And the Japanese, they are known for coming back. On the darkened deck, a sailor grips the railing, staring out into the void where the planes disappeared. Waiting. Listening. Because out there, beyond the smoke, beyond the wreckage, the next wave might already be coming. And if it does, this ship, this proud symbol of American naval power, may not survive the night. The silence doesn't last. It never does. The moment the last echo of enemy engines fades, a different kind of battle begins, quieter, more desperate, and just as deadly. Inside the shattered hull of the USS Chicago CA-29, the war has moved inward. Water is rising. In the forward compartments, it surges through torn steel like a living force, black and freezing. Men waist-deep in darkness struggle to seal bulkheads, their boots slipping against tilted decks slick with oil and seawater. Get that hatch close. The command is shouted, but it's almost drowned by the roar of flooding. Two sailors throw their weight against a steel door, forcing it shut inch by inch. Behind it, voices. Shut. Calling out. Then silence. The hatch slams shut. And with it the choice is made. Above, on the main deck, fire crews battle a different enemy. Flames crawl along ruptured fuel lines, licking at gun mounts and wiring. Smoke pours into the night sky, thick and suffocating. Sailors move through it blindly, dragging hoses, coughing, eyes burning. One man collapses. Another pulls him back without a word. There's no time for anything else. The ship lists to starboard. Not dramatically, but enough that you feel it. A subtle, constant tilt beneath your feet. Plates slide. Equipment shifts. Every movement becomes an effort against gravity. Every second, the ship is deciding something. Live or die. On the bridge, officers fight to keep that decision in their favor. Damage control, report. The responses come in fragments. Flooding contained forward partial. Fires still active midship. Steering compromised but responsive. It's not good. But it's not hopeless either. And in war, that's enough. Out in the darkness, the rest of Task Force 18 regroups, circling protectively around the crippled cruiser. Destroyers cut through the waves like silent guardians, their guns still scanning the sky. Because everyone knows. This was just the first strike. Hours pass. Slowly. Painfully. The kind of time that stretches, distorts, loses meaning. Men work without stopping. Hands blister, muscles burn, eyes strain against smoke and darkness. Every sealed compartment, every extinguished flame feels like a small victory clawed back from the edge. And slowly, the flooding stabilizes. Chicago is still alive. Badly wounded, but alive. Dawn begins to creep over the horizon, a thin gray light bleeding into the sky. It reveals the damage in brutal clarity. The bow is mangled, twisted steel, gaping holes, scorch marks blackening the hull. Anti-aircraft guns sit silent, some destroyed, others abandoned where their crews fell. The deck is scarred, but broken. But it's still there. And so are they. The crew, exhausted, hollow-eyed, but standing. You can almost feel the shift of fragile hope rising as the sun breaks through. They made it through the night. The worst is over. Or so it seems. Orders come down. The ship cannot continue under her own power, not safely. Not like this. She'll have to be towed. Carefully. Slowly. Every mile a risk. The fleet begins to move again, turning south, away from the threat of Guadalcanal, toward what they hope will be safer waters. Tow lines are secured. Engines on the assisting ships strain against the weight of a wounded giant. Chicago follows. Reluctantly. Like a fighter being dragged from the ring. But the ocean is vast. And the enemy is watching. Far to the north, beyond the horizon, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft have already picked up the trail. A crippled cruiser. Barely moving. Escorted but vulnerable. To them, it's not a retreat. It's an opportunity. Back aboard Chicago, the crew doesn't know this yet. They move through the wreckage, continuing repairs, tending to the wounded, counting the missing. Some allow themselves to sit. Just for a moment. Back against warm steel, eyes closing despite the noise, despite the danger. Because exhaustion doesn't ask permission. A sailor looks out over the water, watching the destroyers carve white lines through the sea. It feels different now. Quieter. Safer. But then, a radio crackles. Urgent. Job. Enemy aircraft detected. The words cut through the fragile calm like a blade. Heads snap up. Hands freeze. And in that instant, everyone understands. They're coming back. This time it won't be night. There will be no shadows to hide in. No darkness to mask the approach. Just open sky. Clear targets. And a ship that can barely fight back. The sailor at the railing tightens his grip, knuckles whitening as he scans the horizon. At first, nothing. Then, tiny specks. Distant. But growing. The sound follows. That same low, mechanical hum. Returning. Relentless. On the bridge, an officer exhales slowly. Not fear. Not yet. Just recognition. This isn't over, he says quietly. And as the sun climbs higher, illuminating the wounded cruiser and the endless ocean around her, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The USS Chicago CA-29 survived the night. But daylight is going to finish what the darkness started. The sky is no longer hiding anything. It's wide, open, mercilessly clear. And in that vast blue expanse, the enemy finally reveals itself. At first, they are just dots. Small. Harmless looking. Almost easy to ignore. But the men aboard the USS Chicago CA-29 know better. They've seen what those dots become. Aircraft bearing 080. The call rings out, sharper now in the daylight, more certain. There's no confusion this time. No shadows to question. Just reality. The formation grows as it approaches. Now you can see the shapes clearly: long, slender fuselages, twin engines humming in deadly harmony. Japanese Mitsubishi G4M bombers. Vet. Long range. And built to kill ships like Chicago. The escorting destroyers react immediately, tightening their formation. Guns elevate. Crews rush back to their stations, some still bandaged, some barely steady on their feet. There is no rest. Not here. No now. Chicago herself tries. Her anti-aircraft batteries come alive again, though fewer than before. Some mounts are silent, destroyed in the night, or without crews to man them. Still, the remaining gunners grip their weapons. They aim. They wait. The bombers begin their descent. Not steep, not reckless. Controlled. Calculated. They spread out across the sky, forming a wide arc around the crippled cruiser and her escorts. A hunter's circle. You can feel it building. That pressure. That moment before everything breaks. Hold fire, hold. The order stretches thin across the deck. Because range matters. Timing matters. One mistake and you waste your only chance. The planes come lower. Closer. Now you can see the sunlight glinting off their wings. The red insignias stark against the pale metal. They are beautiful. In a terrible, final kind of way. Fair. The sky erupts. Chicago's guns thunder again, joined by the escorting ships. Tracer rounds streak upward in glowing lines, intersecting, weaving a deadly web across the bomber's path. Explosions bloom in the air, black puffs of flak reaching for the incoming planes. One bomber jerks violently, smoke trailing from its engine. It wobbles, then crashes into the sea in a distant plume of white. A small victory. Gone in seconds. Because the others keep coming. They press through the fire, through the explosions, through the chaos. Steady, unflinching. One bomber breaks formation, diving toward Chicago's port side. Another angles in from starboard. They're coordinating, boxing her in. On the towing ships, engines strain harder, trying to increase speed to throw off the attacker's aim. But Chicago, she can't keep up. She drags behind them like a wounded limb. Predictable. Exposed. Torpedoes incoming. The warning hits like a hammer. You don't see them at first. Then, the thin white wakes slicing through the water, racing toward the ship from multiple directions. Too many. Too fast. Hard rudder. But there's almost nothing left to give. Chicago turns. Belly. The first torpedo passes just ahead of the bow, missing by yards. A breath. A heartbeat of hope. Then the second strikes. The explosion is catastrophic. It rips into the already damaged hull with brutal force, tearing open compartments that had only just been stabilized. The ship shudders violently, her entire frame twisting under the impact. Men are thrown to the deck. Some don't get back up before the shock can settle. Another hit. Further aft. The deck tilts sharply now. No subtle lean. This is different. This is collapse. Inside the ship, the fight is already being lost. Water floods in faster than it can be contained. Bulkheads buckle, lights flicker and die again, plunging entire sections into suffocating darkness. Damage control teams try to respond, but there's nothing left to work with. No time. No space. No chance. Above deck, the realization spreads. Not spoken. Not yet. But understood. The USS Chicago CA-29 is dying. The bombers pull away, their attack complete. They don't need to stay. They know what they've done. Silence begins to fall again, but it's different now. Heavy. Final. The ship lists further, the angle increasing with every passing second. Equipment breaks loose, sliding across the deck, crashing into railings, into men. The sea creeps closer. On the bridge, the decision hangs in the air. Impossible. Inevitable. A voice steady, but strained cuts through the noise. Prepare to abandon ship. For a moment, no one moves. Because those words, they mean everything is over. Then training takes over. Men begin moving with mechanical precision. Life rafts are released. Wounded are carried, some gently, some hastily, because there's no time left for anything else. You can feel the shift again. From fighting to surviving. A sailor pauses at the rail, looking back across the length of the ship. At the guns, the smoke, the torn steel. This ship carried them through months of war. Through fire. Through darkness. Through everything. And now, they have to leave her behind. The water reaches the deck. Cold. Unforgiving. Men begin to jump. One by one. Then in groups. Splashing into the vast, indifferent ocean below. The ship groans a deep metallic sound that feels almost human. She's going down. And as the last survivors push away into the open sea, the cruiser that once stood as a symbol of American strength begins her final descent beneath the waves. But even now, even here, the story isn't over. Because survival in these waters is a battle of its own. The ocean swallows them whole. Not gently, not gradually. Violently. The moment your body hits the water, the shock is immediate, like slamming into a wall of ice and force at the same time. Salt floods your mouth, your ears ring. For a second, you don't even know which way is up. Then instinct takes over. Hip. Surface. Breathe. Around you, chaos. Men thrash in every direction, some shouting, some silent, some already drifting motionless. The surface is littered with debris, shattered planks, twisted metal, life jackets, oil slicks spreading like dark veins across the water. And above it all, the towering silhouette of the USS Chicago CA-29, still not fully gone. She lists heavily now, her deck angled steeply toward the sea. Water pours over her sides in relentless waves, dragging everything downward with it: equipment, wreckage, memories. You can hear her. That deep, grinding groan of metal giving way. A sound no one ever forgets. Swim clear, swim clear. The warning cuts through the panic. Because when a ship this size goes under, it doesn't just disappear. It pulls. Men kick harder, fighting exhaustion, fear, the drag of soaked clothing. Some grab onto floating debris. Others cling to life rafts that are already overcrowded, hands gripping the edges as tightly as possible. There's no order now. No formation. Just survival. Then, it happened. The stern of Chicago lifts suddenly, rising out of the water like a massive, broken monument. For a brief moment, the entire ship seems to hang there caught between worlds. And then she slides down into the depths. The suction follows instantly. A violent, invisible force pulling everything toward the void she leaves behind. Water churns, waves collapse inward, debris spirals. Men scream. Some vanish beneath the surface. Others fight, kicking, clawing, desperate to escape the pull. Then, it's over. The sea closes. Flat again. As if nothing had ever been there. Only the survivors remain. Scattered. Floating. Alone. You can almost feel the silence now. Not peaceful. Empty. The oil burns your eyes, your throat. It clings to your skin, thick and suffocating. Every breath tastes like fuel and salt. Every movement feels heavier than the last. And the sun. The sun is relentless. Hours pass. Or maybe minutes. Time doesn't behave the same way out here. Some men begin to drift together, forming small clusters around life rafts or larger pieces of debris. They help each other climb aboard when they can. They share space, share strength, or what's left of it. Others don't move at all. Faces down. Still. A sailor grips the edge of a raft, his knuckles white, his arms trembling with exhaustion. Another man reaches down, pulling him up with the last bit of strength he has left. No words are exchanged. None are needed. In the distance, the escorting destroyers turn back. Carefully. Cautiously. Because even now the threat hasn't disappeared. The sky is quiet again. Too quiet. Lookouts scan the horizon constantly, searching for any sign of returning aircraft. Guns remain manned, ready. Because the Japanese have done this before. Strike. Wait. Strike again. But for now, they don't come. Rescue operations begin. Destroyers cut slowly through the water, their crews throwing lines, lowering nets, reaching down with outstretched arms. Grab on. Take my hand. One by one, survivors are pulled from the sea, soaked, burned, shaking. Some collapse the moment they reach the deck. Others cling to the hands that saved them, unable to let go. You can see it in their faces. Relief. Brief. All tangled together. A man looks back over the water as he's hauled aboard, his eyes searching for something, someone. He doesn't find it. Because not everyone made it out. The ocean keeps its share. It always does. Hours stretch on as the rescue continues. The number of survivors grows, but so does the weight of what's been lost. Names are called. Some answer. Some not. By late afternoon, the sea begins to empty. The last rafts are checked. The final survivors pulled aboard. And still, the destroyers linger. Just a little longer. Just in case. Because leaving means accepting the truth. That the USS Chicago CA-29 is gone. Gone beneath thousands of feet of dark Pacific water. Gone with the men who couldn't escape. Gone with the months of service, the battles fought, the moments lived aboard her decks. As the sun begins to fall toward the horizon, painting the ocean in shades of orange and red, the ships finally turn away. Behind them, the water stretches endlessly. Empty. Silent. But beneath that surface, the story isn't finished. Because what happened here on this patch of ocean near Rennell Island was more than the loss of a ship. It was a message, a warning, a turning point in a war that was far from over. And for those who survived, this day, this fire, this sinking, would follow them for the rest of their lives. But the question still lingers. Why was Chicago left so exposed? Why did the Japanese strike with such precision? And could this loss have been prevented? The answers lie in the decisions made long before the first torpedo ever hit. The sinking didn't begin with the torpedoes. It began with decisions. Days before the first explosion tore into the hull of the USS Chicago CA-29, the situation around Guadalcanal was shifting quietly, but decisively. The long campaign was nearing its end. American forces had fought for months to secure the island, pushing back relentless Japanese attempts to retake it. Supplies had been contested. Reinforcements had come at terrible cost. The sea itself had become a battlefield night after night of brutal naval engagements. Now, finally, the Japanese were preparing to withdraw. But war has a way of making endings dangerous. The U.S. command knew something was coming. Not a direct confrontation, not another massive fleet engagement. Something smaller, faster. A final effort to protect the evacuation of Japanese troops. Enter Task Force 18, a mix of cruisers and destroyers assigned to intercept any enemy movement and reinforce American positions if necessary. It wasn't the most powerful force in the theater, but it was available. And time mattered. At its center, Chicago. She had already seen combat, already taken damage earlier in the war, already proven she could endure. But endurance isn't the same as readiness. The fleet moved cautiously at first, aware of the threat posed by Japanese land-based aircraft. Unlike carrier battles, where both sides launched from the sea, this was different. The enemy's airfields were close. Too close. Which meant one thing. The Americans would be operating under constant threat from above. And yet, there was a problem. Air cover. The plan relied heavily on fighter protection for nearby bases and carriers, but coordination in the Pacific at this stage of the war was fragile. Distances were vast. Communication was imperfect. Timing everything. When Task Force 18 moved into position, that protection wasn't fully there. Not consistently. Not reliably. It wasn't negligent. It was friction. The kind that defines war. Still, the risk was known. Understood. Accepted. Because the mission had to go forward. Japanese reconnaissance planes had already been sighted in the area, shadows in the sky, watching, tracking, reporting back. Every movement of the American ships was being noted, recorded, prepared for. Back aboard Chicago, the crew had no illusion about this. They had seen what Japanese air power could do. Fast, low-level torpedo attacks, night strikes, precision coordination. And yet they moved forward anyway. Because that's what orders demanded. The formation itself offered some protection. Destroyers screening the larger ships. Guns ready. Lookouts alert. But there was a critical weakness. Speed. Chicago wasn't the fastest ship in the formation to begin with. And after months of operations, wear and tear had taken its toll. She could still fight. Still sail. But she couldn't outrun danger. And in a battle against aircraft, speed is life. As the task force pushed deeper into contested waters, that vulnerability grew more pronounced. They were within range, within sight, within reach. The Japanese didn't rush. They didn't need to. They observed, trapped, with, because they understood something fundamental. You don't strike a fleet when it's at full strength. You strike when it's stretched, when it's tired, when it's just a little too far from help. By the time the first attack came on the night of January 29th, everything was already in motion. Chicago was where they needed her to be. The fleet was where they expected it to be. The skies were clear enough. The distance perfect. And the air cover. Still not enough. From the Japanese perspective, this wasn't luck. It was execution. Back on the American side, the realization would come later. In reports. In debriefings. In the quiet moments after the fighting stopped. But in that moment, in the hours before the attack, there was only tension, only anticipation. You can almost feel it. That uneasy calm that settles over men who know something is coming but don't know when. A sailor glances at the horizon. Nothing. Another checks his watch. Still nothing. And then, night falls. And with it, the first wave arrives. The attack that cripples Chicago. The damage that slows her down. The decision to tow her. Each step logical, necessary. But together, they form a chain. A chain that leads directly to the moment when daylight reveals a wounded ship moving too slowly, too far from protection. A perfect target. And the Japanese, they don't miss. But even now, another question begins to form. One that lingers beyond tactics and timing. Could Chicago have been saved? If the air cover had arrived sooner? If the formation had changed course? If the tow had been abandoned? Or was her fate sealed the moment the first torpedo struck? Because sometimes in war, survival isn't decided in the moment of impact. It's decided long before. Night didn't just fall. It closed in. By the time darkness fully settled over the waters near Rennell Island, Task Force 18 had already begun to feel the weight of exposure. The horizon disappeared first. Then the sky. Then distance itself. Out here, in the open Pacific, night has a way of erasing everything you rely on. Depth. Direction. Certainty. Aboard the USS Chicago CA-29, the crew moved with heightened awareness. Every sound mattered now. Every shadow could mean something or nothing. And that uncertainty, that was the real enemy. Lookouts strained their eyes into the void, scanning for shapes that refused to appear. Radios crackled intermittently, carrying fragments of information, reports of possible sightings, unconfirmed contacts, warnings that came too late or too early. Nothing solid. Nothing certain. But the Japanese didn't need certainty. They had position. They had timing. And most importantly, they had surprise. Far out in the darkness, beyond the range of sight, the attacking force was already forming. Twin-engine Mitsubishi G4M bombers, Betas gliding low over the water, their engines throttled just enough to maintain speed without announcing their presence too soon. They flew in loose formation. Not tight. Not rigid. Flexible. Adaptive. Each pilot knew his role. Each crew understood the plan. They weren't rushing in blindly. They were approaching like hunters, circling, probing, waiting for the exact moment to strike. Back on Chicago, the first indication came not from sight, but from sound. A low hum. Familiar. Unwelcome. It drifted across the deck, barely noticeable at first. A vibration more than a noise, but to trained ears, it was unmistakable. Aircraft. Sound contact, multiple engines. The report snapped through the chain of command instantly. Heads turned. Guns were manned. Hearts began to pound. Still nothing in the sky. That's what made it worse. Because when you can't see the enemy, you imagine him everywhere. Searchlights remained off. For now. Turning them on too early would give away the fleet's position, illuminating them just as clearly as they might reveal the attackers. It was a gamble. Wait too long, and the bombers get too close. Act too soon, and you paint a target on your own ships. Seconds stretched. The hum grew louder. Then, a shape. Just for an instant. A darker shadow moving against the darkness. Vest. Aircraft starboard. The call broke the tension like a gunshot. Searchlights snapped on. Beams cut across the ocean, slicing through the blackness. They swung wildly at first, searching, then locked onto movement. And suddenly, the enemy was everywhere. Bombers burst into view, skimming just above the waves, their silhouettes stark against the white beams. You could see the spray kicked out by their engines, the glint of metal, the unmistakable shape of torpedoes mounted beneath their bodies. They were already in position. Opened fire. The night exploded. Chicago's anti-aircraft guns roared to life, joined instantly by the rest of the task force. Tracer rounds streaked upward, red and orange lines cutting through the darkness. The sky filled with fire-controlled chaos reaching out to meet the incoming threat. One bomber flew straight into it. Too low. Too committed. Shells tore into its wing. It lurched violently, trailing smoke, then slammed into the ocean in a burst of flame and water. But it didn't matter. The others were already making their runs. They came in from multiple angles, spreading the defense thin. Some approached head-on, forcing gunners to track them directly. Others flanked from the sides, slipping through gaps in the barrage. And always, that was the key. Flying just above the water, they minimized their exposure to anti-aircraft fire, reduced reaction time, made themselves harder to track. It was a tactic refined through experience. Deadly. Efficient. On Chicago's deck, gunners struggled to keep up. The targets moved fast, too fast. Every second counted. Every adjustment had to be perfect. But war isn't perfect. One bomber broke through. It skimmed past the outer screen of destroyers, engines screaming now as it closed in on its target. Chicago. You could see it clearly now. The pilot locked in. The torpedo ready. The moment approaching. Hold. Then. Release. The torpedo dropped cleanly into the water, disappearing beneath the surface almost instantly. For a split second, it left only a ripple. Then the wake formed. A thin, white line racing straight toward the cruiser. Into Ming. The helm turned. Slowly. Too slowly. Impact. The explosion tore into Chicago's bow with violent precision. Steel peeled back like paper. The deck heaved upward, then crashed down, sending men sprawling. But the attack wasn't finished. Another bomber slipped through. Then another. More torpedoes hit the water. More wakes converged. The second strike hit deeper. More devastating. This time, the damage wasn't just structural. It was critical. Power flicker. Then failed in sections. Inside the ship, compartments flooded instantly. Water surged through corridors, slamming into bulkheads, rising faster than men could react. Damage control teams moved in, but already, they were behind. Because this wasn't a single hit. It was a coordinated blow. And Chicago. She had taken the worst of it. Above, the remaining bombers pulled away, vanishing back into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared. No lingering. No hesitation. They had done their job. The guns fell silent. One by one. Smoke drifted upward. Flames flickered. Water poured in. And in the sudden, crushing quiet that followed, the reality settled over the ship like a weight. She was still afloat. But only just. And somewhere out there, beyond the darkness, the enemy was already preparing to return. Because in this battle, one strike was never the end. It was only the beginning.